In the deep jungles of Guadalcanal, where the sunlight only penetrates in weak streaks, there is a story lost to time, not about a mighty army, nor about a famous general, but about one man with only one gun and the will to survive in the midst of hell. Guadalcanal in 1942-1943 was one of the most brutal battlefields in the Pacific, where people had to fight not only the enemy, but also the rain, poisonous mosquitoes, malaria, hunger, and the cold of the jungle nights. There, every soldier had to ask himself every day, do I have enough strength to live until tomorrow? The forest here is unlike any other in the United States. The space is so dense that even breathing can be heard. Nowhere else in the world can a forest be so silent and so deadly. And in that environment, the most feared enemy is not machine guns or artillery, but Japanese snipers. The snipers were so silent that people called them the ghosts of the forest. In 3 days, just 3 days, 11 Japanese snipers killed 14 Americans. No one knew where they were hiding. No one saw them shoot, and they only appeared in the moment the bullet left the barrel and disappeared into silence. The soldiers had to stay in the light while the enemy lurked in the shadows, stalking and hunting them. But then there was a man sent to that area, a man unlike any other. His name was John B. George. John B. George, a young man from Illinois, who was the state shooting champion in 1939. He was not a big man or a strong man. He did not have the appearance of a steel warrior, but he had something that very few soldiers had. That was the ability to see and shoot instinctively like a wild animal hunting its prey. The Winchester Model 70 he carried, what many officers called a deer hunting toy, was the most accurate and useful weapon in the entire regiment. George knew about his friend. He was the one who understood its true power, not those who were laughing at him. He didn't care about being laughed at, because he understood. On Guadalcanal, survival was not for the strong. It was for those who knew how to observe, those who knew how to wait, those who knew how to fire a single bullet but at the crucial moment would decide life or death. On the morning of January 22nd, 1943, at 9:17 a.m., John George saw what any other soldier would have missed, a tiny movement at an altitude of 100 feet, a flicker of darkness in the sunlight. With the eye of an experienced sniper, he knew it was not a bird, not a leaf. It was a Japanese sniper, lying on a giant root of a banyan tree. George took his Winchester Model 70 into position and took clear aim. In just a moment, George pulled the trigger. A gunshot rang out in the silence. The Japanese sniper was killed. That fall was not just the death of an enemy. It was the beginning of the most fierce pursuit any Japanese sniper had ever faced. Their natural enemy had appeared. George reloaded and continued aiming. He followed every trace, every little movement, because he knew that Japanese snipers did not operate alone. They worked in pairs, one as a spotter and one as a sniper. The other enemy was definitely near the same position or a tree nearby. Not a swaying branch or a small point of light reflection could escape his eyes. George fired another shot. This second shot was one of the most difficult shots of his life. The Japanese sniper knew he had been exposed and changed his position lightly, jumping over the tree trunk to move to another branch. In that brief moment, less than 0.2 of a second, George pulled the trigger. His comrades were surprised and amazed. They could not see anything, they only knew that every time George fired, and then a Japanese soldier fell from the tree. Was another time they were saved from the hands of death. Not. In just a few hours, George had taken down 5 Japanese snipers. An achievement that no one in the company had ever been able to do. To understand the danger George faced, we need to look at the two completely different styles of sniping between Japan and the United States. Japanese snipers were trained according to the ancient principles of the samurai: not moving, not breathing, not showing their form. They often climbed trees 20, 30 meters high, lying still all day without moving, only firing one bullet and then changing position, using leaves, monkeys, birds as natural signals, shooting from the direction of the sun to blind the enemy. They only shot at weak points such as the neck, eyes, or gaps in the armor. Each bullet was a declaration of death to the enemy, and with each shot, the American corpse lying on the trail was a threat that made the entire company not dare move another half step. On the contrary, American snipers at that time were still in their early stages of training. Many soldiers had never used a scope because, according to them, the universal tube was long, heavy, difficult to use in the jungle. The sniper positions of American soldiers were mainly in underground bunkers or behind tree trunks. These were passive positions, easy to predict, easy to reveal positions, easy to be detected by the enemy through gunfire and special terrain. It is not an exaggeration to say that in this terrain, Japanese snipers were professional hunters. The U.S. military was just victims, prey to be hunted. Until George appeared, the situation changed. What makes John George special is not only his observation skills, his marksmanship, but also the weapon in his hand, the Winchester Model 70. This gun is not a military weapon. It is a hunting rifle. No soldier would dare to carry a hunting rifle into a life-or-death battle, but the Winchester Model 70 is extremely sophisticatedly crafted by the hands of craftsmen with a higher standard than any Springfield or Garand at that time. The 24-inch barrel is stiff, stable, avoids vibration when firing, with 30.06 bullets with a muzzle velocity of 2,700 feet a second. At a distance of 200, 300 yards, it can penetrate thin tree trunks, penetrate thick leaves, penetrate light armor, and still cause enough damage to take down the enemy immediately. George's gun is also equipped with a Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope. Although the magnification of the sight, its scope is only 2.5 times larger than normal, but the field of view is wide, very suitable for hunting in the forest, where the prey always appears and disappears and only comes into sight for a few seconds. Its deadly important point when George has to shoot with Japanese snipers is that it is against the sunlight. But this type of scope does not cause glare, is not reflected by sunlight, while the scope of Japanese snipers reflects light every time the angle of aim changes. This is an extremely important advantage in the game of snipers. The enemy cannot see George, but he can see the enemy clearly. And when the light flashes from George's side, it will be the bullet from his gun. That is the last light that Japanese snipers can see. In the hands of a normal person, the Winchester Model 70 will be a good hunting rifle. But in the hands of John George, it is the call of death in the green forest. Please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. The second day, the battle was no longer simple. The Japanese were more vigilant because they knew the old tactics could no longer fool the American soldiers, especially George. The Japanese soldiers began to use decoy tactics. They set up fake moving traps so that the enemy could easily see their position and shoot at them, thereby knowing the position of the American snipers. Some of the gunmen, in their haste and not observing carefully, shot at the decoys and revealed their position and were shot down by the Japanese snipers. The Japanese made a fake arm out of cloth, stuffed it with straw, tied to a thin rope. If they shot at it, George would die instantly because the real sniper was waiting elsewhere. A tiny light flashed in the treetops ahead. Not a big metal, just a reflection of light on the edge of the Arisaka's rifle's sight. But right at the moment, the sun was slanting. George had just realized it when a gunshot rang out. The first bullet flew past his face so close that George could feel the heat of it brushing against the skin of his cheek. He rolled to the left on reflex, sliding down a short distance. Then the second shot rang out. The bullet lodged itself in the mud where his head had been lying just 0.2 seconds before. George gasped, crawling behind a large tree root. He saw me. After those 2 shots, there was absolute silence. There was no third shot, no sound. The Japanese snipers were doing what they were best known for, waiting for their target's breathing to stabilize before firing the finishing shot. George pressed his chest against the ground, trying to slow his breathing, but his heart was pounding so hard that the tip of his scope shook. He tried to calm down and slowly scanned to the left. Nothing. To the right, nothing. He couldn't turn his head because exposing even 2 centimeters more meant death. George closed his eyes for a second. He remembered learning this skill from an old hunter. When you lose sight in the forest, use your ears, not the footsteps. Japanese snipers never leave footsteps. George heard the sound of insects. To the left, there was a steady sound of cicadas. Ahead, the sound of insects still echoed. But to the right, no cicadas, no crickets, no bees. He knew from experience that the forest was always silent around a predator. George turned his gun to the right, very slowly, only a few millimeters per second. When the scope swept over a small, dark area, George saw the silhouette of a Japanese man lying against a tree trunk, the Arasaka resting on his knee. He was adjusting the angle of his shot. The Japanese sniper was leaning to find George's head. The distance was only 70 yards. Shooting angle 15 degrees from above. If the Japanese soldier shot first, George would definitely die. George did not have time to adjust the scope to the correct position. He pulled the trigger as soon as the enemy's image entered the center of the scope. George's bullet missed 3 to 4 centimeters due to his heartbeat, but still hit the Japanese sniper's shoulder, causing him to flinch to the side. The Japanese sniper was still alive. He turned around to hide and tried to raise the gun to aim and shoot back. At that moment, George pulled the bolt, reloaded, and brought the gun to his shoulder in a split second. He raised the gun first, but George pulled the trigger first. The second shot hit him right in the middle of the forehead. The enemy's body fell off. The tree rolled 3 times and then lay still. He was not happy. He did not scream, just lay still and breathed heavily. Sweat and mud mixed on his face, because he knew clearly that just now death was only a split second away from him. If he had shot 0.1 seconds earlier, if he had stood 1 centimeter higher, just 1 centimeter, he would have died. Japan takes the initiative to attack, showing off their battlefield experience. That afternoon, George and 3 American soldiers went on patrol. What they didn't know was that a Japanese sniper team was waiting for them. The Japanese sniper used a 3-step tactic. 1, pull, shoot the ground right in front of the American soldiers' feet to lure them to stop. 2, push, shoot a second shot close to their heads to force them to hide. 3, block Japanese soldiers from the right, rushed up and shot to block their escape route. George heard the 2 shots match like a deadly song. He shouted, "Get down, don't run!" A panicked American soldier jumped up and ran, was immediately shot in the back by a Japanese sniper and fell down. George pulled the other 2 down. "They're closing in. If you run, they'll shoot from both sides." Asterisk. He scanned his eyes for the first sniper position. He couldn't find it. The second sniper also missing. The Japanese have changed their tactics, no longer lying in trees. They are moving on the ground hunter style. George smelled the faint scent of gunpowder in the air, a sign of danger. As he approached a half-meter-deep black hole of water, George knew he was being followed. A faint rustling sound came from behind him. Someone was crawling, not walking. George didn't think. He dove into the hole, lay flat on his back in the mud, and raised his gun to his jaw so that the water almost touched his nose. The cold water stopped his blood for a second, but he held his breath. The Japanese sniper crawled to the edge of the hole exactly 2 meters away from him. He was looking for footprints. If he looked down into the hole, George pulled the trigger underwater. The sound was muffled, but enough for the bullet to pierce the water lodge in the enemy's lower jaw and knock him to the side. George surfaced, breathing heavily, but as soon as he stood up, 6 Japanese soldiers rushed out from 3 directions. This was no longer sniping. This was hunting and being hunted. The first one rushed out from the left. George shot immediately. Without aiming carefully, the bullet hit his collar. The second one jumped from behind a giant tree root. George turned, shot lower because he was slipping. The bullet pierced his chest. The third one rushed down the slope. George shot instinctively. The bullet went into his sternum. The Japanese soldier fell. The remaining 3 returned fire fiercely. George rushed toward the bamboo bush, fired another shot through the tree trunk at the 4th one. The 5th one circled to the right, but when he raised his gun, George shot half a second before. The 6th one hesitated, then ran deep into the forest. George did not chase. He sat down, breathing heavily. Sweat mixed with mud on his face. His whole body trembled with adrenaline. "I am alive," his inner voice echoed like a whisper. After killing 5 of the 6 Japanese, George's breathing became heavy and ragged. He put his hand on his left side and felt a warm liquid seeping out from under his shirt. It was blood. A piece of wood had pierced him where the Japanese bullet had pierced the tree trunk. It was a small piece, but deep. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was enough to cause shock and a lot of blood loss. George tried to calm himself down so he wouldn't faint, not now. George gritted his teeth, leaned back against the tree trunk, and held his breath to avoid losing more blood. The silence of the jungle suddenly became heavy. The sound was muffled. The last one didn't rush in and shoot randomly like the others. He was more experienced. He moved in an arc, cutting off George's escape. He didn't run, he crawled inch by inch. The soldiers trained at the Kur shooting range slithered like snakes, aiming to get within 15 meters and finish him off with a single accurate shot to the head. George knew he was out there. He could feel him moving by the crackling of his uniform as he changed positions. George clenched his fist, but at that moment he felt the world spin slightly. The wound was bleeding faster than he expected. The Japanese crawled to a tall tree root, a perfect position for close-range sniping. He poked his head out as fast as a mongoose. George saw him first, but his hands were shaking and his eyes were blurry. He raised his scope, but couldn't get a good aim. The Japanese crawled higher, his gun pointed at George. George had only 1 second to shoot. Otherwise, he would shoot first. George pressed the butt of his gun against the tree trunk to reduce the shaking of his hand. He knew he couldn't wait for the scope to stop before he pulled the trigger. His eyes began to darken. The Japanese soldier raised his gun. His finger was on the trigger. George pulled the trigger, and in a split second he moved his head away from the tree roots. The shot rang out. The recoil from the gun made the wound sting, almost tearing his ribs. George fell to the ground, his face pressed against the mud, unsure if he had hit him or not. Resigning to his fate, he lay still and waited. There was no return fire, no footsteps approaching. George slowly raised his head and looked up. The Japanese soldier lay prone about 28 meters away from him. The bullet missed his head but was enough to kill him. He leaned his head against the tree trunk, breathing heavily. Everything spun. He could no longer hear the birds, the wind, the water. George tore a piece of his shirt and pressed it to the wound. Then, relying on his survival instinct, he tried to drag himself deeper into the forest, looking for a safe hiding place. No more bullets, no more Japanese soldiers, only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Today he lived another day. George tried to bandage the wound with a torn piece of his shirt, but the blood still seeped out. He stood up, walked a few steps, then fell to his knees again. George tried to drag himself into the hollow of a tree leaning against a large root. He heard rustling leaves in the distance, but could not tell if they were Japanese or American soldiers. Jesus Christ, it's George, he's alive. His comrades had found him. Although weak, George still tried to remind his comrades to be careful of the snipers. Special gunfire still rang out in the distance, probably the remnants of the Japanese, but the Americans moved quickly, taking George out of the danger zone. For 4 days straight in the heat, the humidity, the dense jungle of Guadalcanal, John George fought a war that most people never saw. One man, one gun, and the absolute silence of the jungle. During those 4 days, George killed a total of 11 Japanese snipers. Many more Japanese soldiers were killed in close combat. George survived at least 3 near-death experiences. He saved the lives of his entire company by breaking through a Japanese sniper encirclement. He later trained dozens of American snipers. His recorded experiences became one of the most important military documents of World War II. In 1947, George decided to write down what had happened, not for publication, just for his own record. He wanted to document the weapons and tactics of jungle warfare while the details were still fresh. He wrote for 6 months. The manuscript grew to over 400 pages. A friend at the National Rifle Association read the manuscript and suggested publication. George was reluctant. The book was technical, detailed descriptions of rifles and ammunition and ballistics. Not the kind of content that interested general readers, but the NRA convinced him. The book was published in 1947 under the title Shots Fired in Anger. It became a classic among firearms enthusiasts and military historians. The book described George's experiences on Guadalcanal and Burma with clinical precision. No embellishment, no hero worship, just facts and observations about what worked and what did not work in combat. The book is still in print today, still used as a reference by collectors and historians studying World War II small arms. George's descriptions of Japanese weapons remain some of the most detailed contemporary accounts available. George lived to see the United States fight 3 more wars: Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War. He watched the evolution of military rifles from the Garand to the M14 to the M16. He watched sniping become a formal military specialty with dedicated training and equipment. He watched the lessons of World War II being relearned and refined by new generations of soldiers. John George died on January 3, 2009. He was 90 years old. The Winchester Model 70 that had killed Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal was donated to the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. It sits in a display case with a placard describing its history. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like any other vintage hunting rifle, but it is not. It is the rifle that proved a state champion marksman with a mail-order scope could outshoot professionally trained military snipers. The rifle that cleared the Point Cruz groves in 4 days, when an entire battalion could not do it in 2 weeks. The rifle that changed how the American military thought about individual marksmanship in modern warfare. If this story touches you as much as it does us, do me a favor and hit the like button. Every like helps YouTube share this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll bring more history out of the dusty archives to you. Leave a comment and let us know where you're watching this from the US, UK, Australia, Canada. Thank you for watching. You're not just a viewer. You're also a part of keeping these memories alive. These men deserve to be remembered.